Well, thank you everyone again for joining us. We're going to get started with our program. I believe Professor Hall has pulled up a virtual tour of our law library, so although you can't all see it in person, it's spectacular. We do have at least this video that we can show you, and then Professor Hall will get started with her mock class on legal research, which apparently is a very popular topic. And by way of introduction for myself, I'm Nancy Rojas Hill. I'm the Associate Director of Admissions here at Southwestern Law School. If you have questions related to admissions, your application, the process, etc., I'll be here throughout the event on chat, but trust me, you will want to pay attention to Professor Hall. I have seen this class before and it's a good one. It's also interactive, so please don't be shy. Feel free to participate when she asks you to Google things or answer questions. You're not in law school yet, so we probably won't be doing any cold calling. So just volunteer and speak up. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Professor Hall.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maggie Hall, and I'm the director of the Law Library. And I also teach in the first year program, the legal research classes. And then I have some advanced classes, advanced legal research, practical legal research, some very specific topic ones that we're going to be doing. And part of that is because that is what new lawyers do all the time. They research everything because you just don't know everything that you might need to know. And even as you progress through your careers, you still research because the law is ever changing. So we find that the research classes are very important, and law is almost like a foreign language. And there's codes and there's short words, and we help you navigate that. So during your 3 years in law school, we often help you navigate study space, databases, and then when you're afraid to ask the question, you can ask the librarian and they will just help you, because that is our job. We are not cold calling on you when you come to the reference desk. We just want to help you. And for me, when I went to law school, I remember sitting in class in my first semester, my first couple weeks, and they kept talking about according to learned hand. And I kept looking for it, and I didn't want to look stupid. And I was like, what is this learned hand doctrine? I don't know. All these cases are according to learned hand. And finally, I got up the courage to ask somebody, and that fellow student didn't know either. And they're like, I don't know what it is. They just keep saying it. And finally, somebody asked somebody to ask the professor. And it turns out learned hand was a man's name. There was Judge Learned Hand. And he was considered next to the Supreme Court with how important his opinions are. And I'm like, well, how did I know that a person was called learned? And every law friend that I went to law school with, I tried to get them to name all their children learned, because I thought the name has to continue somehow. So where will you come for questions? So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you. This is what we're going to talk about in a minute. We're going to talk about how a frog can kill a golf course. But before that, let me just show you a little bit of the library. And I'm going to turn down the very peppy music that plays. But I just want you to get a sense of how beautiful our building is. And the library takes up 3 floors of this building. It's a historical Art Deco building called Bullock's Wilshire. It was a department store back in 1929 when it opened. This is the main entrance in, original artwork still from 1929. And as you go in, there's a couple main things on this first floor. One is a courtroom, and that's where mock classes take place and all sorts of other events. And we have a very close relationship. We're very much a community. And we have adopted the Hoover Elementary School as part of our community. And we do field trips with those children and mock trials with them. That's one of my favorite days of the year, is when we do a mock trial. We have somebody steal their teacher's purse after lunch, and they do a whole trial in there and actually deliberate. And then this is the library across the hall. And this is the main reading floor. And it was a department store, and a department store, believe it or not, yields itself really well to a library, because as you see as we go around, if you want to study in big open spots on tables, you can do that. If you like carols, if you like smaller rooms, we have smaller rooms with tables, smaller rooms with carols. We have the California room, which is a mix. So it really is a beautiful, beautiful place, because you have to spend a lot of time there, and people study there all the time. We have been closed now because of COVID for just under a year. And I still get emails every week asking when we're going to be able to get back in. And as soon as county and city allow us back in, we are ready to open. So we want to give students a good place to study, a good quiet place, good internet, good facilities to study in. And so that's where we're ready. As soon as they give us the okay, we are all set. All right, so in this hypothetical, I'm going to tell you a little story about you being an in-house counsel for a golf company. And this particular golf company is called American Golf, and they own properties all over the country, but they own some right here in LA. And in this hypothetical, they own a golf course that butts up against residential property. And there is a residential property that they have wanted for a long time. It's one of the largest pieces of residential property. It was owned by a famous horticulturalist. And so they want it for a couple of reasons. A, the land is already beautiful, and they want to expand their golf course to incorporate this person's land. And then the house they're going to use as an offsite, another clubhouse. So this land is very important. And they got the contract, the land sale, the purchase agreement. And there was a small clause in there that made it, they had to acknowledge by initialing next to that, they acknowledge that this horticultural's home was a habitat for the red-legged frog. And okay, habitat for the red-legged frog, no problem. We want that land, we want to incorporate it. They purchased the land, and then over the next year and a half, they hire a very well-known pro golfer to redesign the back nine of this golf course to incorporate that new land that they have. As they're getting ready to break ground and start to implement these changes, and they have millions of dollars now invested in the property and millions of dollars invested in the redesign, they get a letter. They get a letter from the local wilderness protection. And they want to make sure that they have taken into account the red-legged frog, because this is a habitat for the red-legged frog. And all of a sudden it goes back, and they look and they see that they acknowledged in their contract that, yes, this is the habitat for a red-legged frog. And all of a sudden they're like, what is this going to do to us? What does this mean? So many people would begin by Googling. So I'd like you all to just Google, if you have a chance, if you're in front of your computer and can also Google. A lot of people would do that. They would Google red-legged frog to see what kind of legal information they could get for free on the internet, because we are accustomed to be able to Google, and Google pull up the most important sources right off the bat. So as you're doing that, I want to let you know that some of you are going to be hit in the face with Mark Twain. And that's because the celebrated jumping frog of Calaveras, I don't even know, I can't even say the county, and it's in right outside of Sacramento. That frog is a California red-legged jumping frog that is the topic of that story. So you get a lot of things that come up about the jumping frog, and you can still go to a jumping frog contest in this county. I won't attempt to butcher the name again, but you can do that. But this doesn't really help a lawyer. This doesn't help a lawyer understand more about what kind of things. So did anybody happen to find some law and some websites? Does anybody happen to have anything that they think would be a good source? Alexandria Davis.
Hello. Yeah, when I first Googled, let's see, I don't know, my Google's not there anymore, but the EPA came up and it just, the first thing that I saw was that it was, you can't use certain pesticides, which I don't know what they would use pesticides for, but if they're just building, but that was just the first thing I saw right when I Googled it.
Nope, and that is a good thing. So you went to, when you're researching for free on the internet, one of the things you want to do is look for .gov sites. Many of you might have found, and we're going to talk about the pesticides thing in a little bit. That actually comes up again. But in this case, some of you might have decided to go to Wikipedia because you would see something like this. And I Googled red-legged jumping frog law. And it comes up and it says it has protection under federal and state laws. So you might feel the need to go see that Wikipedia page. And I am not going to tell you that Wikipedia is terrible. I am going to say that I know what you're going to do. You would never, ever cite to this source. But as a finding tool, it might be beneficial if you read enough of it. And when I say read, I mean actually read. And because sometimes their footnotes are good, and their footnotes lead you to the Fish and Wildlife site where they talk about the red-legged frog, or they let you know roughly the time frames that different things happened. So I'm not saying that it's unusable information, but it is information that you couldn't cite to. Because I could go into this page right now and put something else in and put it in, and it's a crowdsourcing system. People might not check it right away. So you can't rely on it, but you can try to use it to glean a little bit of information that you then go to better sources and look at. So Wikipedia isn't the worst place in the world that you might go to. But better is something like Alexandria found, which is a government website. So for instance, you might have come across the Sacramento Fish and Wildlife Office. You don't want to dismiss it because it's Sacramento and we're LA, because what they're doing is they're filtering out information. So the Sacramento Fish and Wildlife Office is the California Wildlife Office that handles more about the red-legged frog. And in this one, you would find that there are maps of where it's a protected animal. So that might be helpful to you. But it's the law library and the databases that we have that are actually the most beneficial to you, because what they're going to do is they're going to take the information and they're going to help you understand how different things work together. Because, and I think I have to stop sharing for a second. And then I'm going to share his picture because I wanted you to see that this is the kind of stuff that you're actually going to find. Can everybody see that it's just a list of codes? So some of these are case law, some of these are statutes, some of these are federal statutes, some of these are state statutes, some of these are federal cases, some of these are state cases, some of these are executive orders, some are regulations at the state and federal level. And this is what a lawyer has to decipher and understand to be able to determine what rules, what laws, what they have to follow to be able to modify the habitat for an endangered species that is not only an endangered species, but also the state amphibian. So it has protections on multiple levels through multiple laws because it's the state amphibian and it is also an endangered species. So I think I'm going to pause here on this beautiful screen with all these codes, and I think we have some questions. So I can see the names. So if the
Sure. We have Juanito raising his hand.
all right.
Hi. No, I believe that you guys covered it. I just was able to come upon the wildlife and endangered wildlife rescue government website where it just stated and reiterated the fact that they were a protected species. So that was prior to your comments.
Excellent. Do we have any more hands? All right, so that is what is so exciting is you think it's the red-legged frog. Who cares about the red-legged frog? But by getting that contract and agreeing and knowing that you have a habitat that was designed for the protection of the red-legged frog, all of a sudden, all of that work that was done to design the golf course, all of the money spent, because the pro will still be paid, was all for naught because somebody didn't research one little clause in a contract that was unusual. And so the first thing that happened was when you hit something in a contract, it is not all forms. It is not all identical. They may have bought 30 properties for different golf courses, and each one of those contracts are going to have something that, yeah, 85% of it is going to be the same. It's all going to be the same language. You're going to be used to it. You are a land attorney within this corporation, but there's going to be this little 15% that is unique to that. And in this scenario, that is that tiny little clause acknowledging that there was a red-legged frog habitat, which then makes you have to do a lot more work. Makes you have to research, what does this mean federally? What does it mean statewide? What does it mean within rules and regulations, which fall under the executive branch? And what happens with statutes, which are under the legislative branch? So there's a lot of things out there. And just Googling might lead you to pieces and part of that, but it will never give you the full picture as good as our legal databases do. And the other thing is, when you're in law school, this all looks like gibberish to you right now. You might know one or two of them. You might sort of understand what a couple of them are. But this is something that once you've completed 3 or 4 years of law school, or if you're thinking of scale, the 2 years, this is all understandable. You know exactly what this is, what volume it is, what page number. You know exactly that this is a federal regulation versus this is a state regulation. So I want you to know that while this might seem to overwhelm you just at first glance, once you are starting to research and you start to learn the law, then these things become much easier to you. But it is a second language. It's a second language that you have to learn and then start working with. And we'll help you do that because that's our job. Our job is to help you understand what these things are and how you analogize them to the situation you have in front of you. All right, so I am going to share my screen and show you a couple of these databases. All right, so how many of you have worked in, and you know what, I'll stop sharing just so I can see you. So I can see a few of you. Raise your hands. How many of you have either worked in law as a paralegal, as a clerk, as something that you have heard of things like LexisNexis, you've heard of things of Westlaw? Okay, there's a couple of you. Now, for those of you that haven't, those are specialized legal databases that become your lifeblood. And there's other ones as well. Westlaw and Lexis are the big ones. They're the ones that most attorneys will use in their lifetime in some form. You might not have both of them. You might only have one or the other. And that's okay, because again, what we do within these 3 years is get you proficient in multiple databases so that when you go out into the real world, and they are very expensive, I just have no other way other than to put it that they are very expensive. They own the legal information and they make your life as an attorney easier, so you will pay. So we purchase them as the library, as the school, and give them to you over the course of your 2, 3, or 4 years at Southwestern. And during your time, that's when you're getting to know them and getting to know some of the tricks about using them to make the searches better, because they are very expensive out in the real world, and it's not Google. So you just can't type it in, because really, if you think about it, if all you needed to do was do a search on Westlaw, why would anybody hire an attorney and pay them to do a search on Westlaw? They would just purchase Westlaw themselves for the day, for the week, if it was that easy. So even though these systems are out there, you still have to know how to use them to find the answers that you need, because they're just helpful tools. They don't replace the lawyer's brain. Because if it ever does, then they will not hire lawyers anymore. They will just buy Westlaw or Lexis. So I'm going to show them, and I'm going to show a couple other ones. All right, so this is the library's main page. And I just want to show you that even though we're virtual right now, we still offer almost all the services that we offered as librarians before we left the building. So we have a remote circulation desk, which means between 7:30 and 11 o'clock, somebody is monitoring that email that can help a student find their barcode if they need to get on a smaller database, that can help a student find where something is. So somebody's always monitoring that. Then there's a remote reference desk where there's a librarian who can help with harder questions. You are working as an extern somewhere, or you have a class, a seminar paper, and you need help researching 1919 copyright law. And we're there to help you with that. And somebody is monitoring that, usually from 8 in the morning till 8 at night. And then we have Zoom drop-in hours. What that means is that a librarian sits on the computer, and anybody who has a quick question, a long question, it's just like coming up to the reference desk. You just click on that link and it takes you to our portal, and a student can just pop in, and a librarian is sitting there. That happens every day. For at least 2 hours, there's a librarian that's just sitting there live to talk to you. And then you can always schedule a meet with a librarian. And meet with a librarian means it's connected to our calendars. And if we don't already have an appointment, it allows you to make an appointment with a librarian. So if you have time free on Monday at 4 o'clock, the system's going to find you a librarian that has time free at Monday at 4 o'clock and put the two of you together for an appointment. So those things are great, because we're only showing you a few of the databases, but the actual databases that the library purchases for helping students find things is a huge list, and you can't know all of those things. So a librarian can help you. And as you start to find what area of law you're going to want to work in, there are specialized databases that can help you with those things. And so that's a great aspect of this, is that in law, if you're going to be a securities lawyer, well, then CCH is going to be better, and we can help you understand how that works. Walters Kluwer Cheetah is great for practice areas such as healthcare law. So if you're going to go and work in the healthcare system, then we can train you on how to use the database that you're most likely going to get when you get out into the real world. And so I wanted you to know that even though today we're going to be really focusing in on Westlaw, Lexis, and CEV Pro, which I just want to point out, that there's many other things out there that we can help you with. Any questions about databases before I jump into Westlaw?
I do.
Yes.
I have one question. The databases. In my previous work, working with a nonprofit, a legal nonprofit, and working with grants and federal funding and all of the such, how vastly different are the databases from reporting requirements for grants, federal grants, things like that, in terms of searching? Are they expunging data, or are you inputting data?
So for that particular aspect, there's not too much difference between a Westlaw and a Lexis. However, There are other sources out there where you can find examples that have been done, and you can find the government clearinghouses where you might be able to look at other examples that went through, and those would be more beneficial. So something like ProQuest Congressional, that is much more used by nonprofits and by lobbyists, because it allows you to go in and get a lot more information about all the various Congress people, all the various bills that are going through. So there are those kinds of specialized databases that help you if you go into certain fields, that help you more than others. But Westlaw and Lexis are really more of the larger picture databases.
Like at the macro level?
Yep. So,
Okay.
and they try to grab everything, and they try very hard to make sure that you want to go to them. So they might have the bigger treatises, but then they also have very specific things that are practice libraries that will help.
So in a way, they're just exclusive and expensive?
They're expensive because of all the extraneous matter that they put in with free government work. And then they have their own. They are publishers. They are publishers of the major treatises. And that's part of what makes them different. For example, Collier on Bankruptcy is the Bible on bankruptcy law. And you can only find it on Lexis because it's published by Lexis. But Westlaw will have another bankruptcy treatise. It just might not have that name recognition. Westlaw will have Wright and Miller's Federal Practice, which is how you practice in the federal government. It just has everything that you need to know. It is the go-to. It's about 75 volumes. Lexis can't publish that one because that's a West product. So they have Moore's Federal Practice. And that is a similar and equally, maybe not as equally good, but if you don't have Westlaw and you only have Lexis, it's an amazing product. So you have to look at things like that. So that's where they really differ in their materials, is they are both major legal publishers of things called books. I know you guys don't remember what books are, but they are a real thing. And they are still book publishers that put their information online versus online publishers that print on demand. So when you're researching through them, they still have some of the features of a book, because that is what they really are still book publishers. There's a couple other ones. Bloomberg Law is the newest player. They were popular. They are popular because they allow you to budget better, whereas these are done more like a cable subscription and some pay-per-view. Bloomberg Law was, we'll give you everything we have for $500 a month per attorney. So if you have a firm of 5 attorneys, you know that you're going to be paying $2,500 a month to have 5 different accesses to Bloomberg. And that made budgeting easier, but they are not the publishing giants that Lexis and Westlaw are. So that's why we have so many research classes and why you go through so many research things, because we want you to know how to utilize these databases so that when you do go out and have to pay for them, you're frugal, you're cost effective, because we don't want you blowing all your profit because you're playing on Westlaw like it's Google. So that's some of them, but we're going to look at Westlaw right now first.
Professor Hall,
Yeah.
I think there's a hand up from Brian.
Yes.
If you'd like to ask his question.
Yes, please.
Brian, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question. Maybe he no longer has his question.
No problem.
And there are a few people, Professor Hall, asking in the chat whether access to these databases continues after graduation. Do you know the answer?
Yes, I do. It does not. They give it to you for a very short amount of time. I make a joke sometimes that they're a little bit like drug dealers. They give it to you for free, and then when you're addicted to it and you can't live without it, then they charge you. And so that's why we say, don't just get to know Westlaw, because we've had students that have made that mistake in the past where they're like, I'm going to focus and I'm going to learn Westlaw really well, and I am going to know it. And then they go to a firm and that firm has Lexis and they have to learn everything. So we say, even though you do get a preference, it's Coke and Pepsi. You will become a Coke or a Pepsi person. You will like the blue of Westlaw better versus the red of Lexis. You will like how Westlaw pulls up certain results. You will just get a preference for one over the other, but you still have to know how to utilize the other ones because you don't know what you're going to get. So in this particular case, I did a search. In fact, I'll erase it and do it again. So this is what it looks like. It's just a very basic toolbar. And I have it set to search all state and federal. Now, normally I would switch this to a California, but I wanted you to see the breadth of information you can get. Now, I actually did a much more generic search, which you might be wondering, why am I not searching the red-legged frog? That's because when you're doing legal research, you care more about analogizing what the issue is, not necessarily something that's factually exactly like your client. So in this case, it's really more about a land sale within the same paragraph as an endangered species. Now, the reason I did this is, what if in that contract for the land sale, they never acknowledged that there was this endangered species habitat? Could you then go back and sue to get out of that contract? So there's a lot of different things that can happen. So keeping it to almost more generic words will help you focus in on a search better. So in this case, I don't put red-legged frog in. I put endangered species because I don't care. What I care about is the purchasing of property and the redevelopment of it when it has a habitat for an endangered species. That is the core of my issue, not the red-legged frog. So I'm going to go ahead and search this. And the /P is in the same paragraph. So I want land sale and endangered species within the same paragraph. I don't want it too far apart. And we get over 10,000 cases from Westlaw. 10,000 cases that somehow have land sale within the same paragraph of endangered species. And that's too many. That is too many to deal with. Nobody can read that many cases. I like to read, and I can't read that many cases. I certainly can't read that many cases that are going to deal with the same topic. So these systems, where they really lend their benefit to you, that is something better than a Google or a free search, is these filtering options. So over here, I have many different things that I can use as filtering, but I'm just going to use a couple of them to show you how it whittles down 10,000 cases to a more manageable number. So I live in California. My issue is in California. So I'm just going to narrow it down to California cases. And that drops it from 10,000 to 500. So right off the bat, that's 500. That's a little more reasonable, but I'm still never going to read 500 cases about the same issue. So then I'm going to look at what's called reported status. So all the cases that are out there, only a few of them are chosen to be what is called reported and therefore precedent. But there's a lot of unreported ones, because if you reported every case, we would have no physical building big enough to hold all the cases, because there's just so many. In California, in the federal courts, they only report 6% of the cases. So that means 94% of the cases are never reported. So I'm going to narrow it down to just reported cases. And in this particular instance, that keeps it in the 400s. So it really didn't whittle out a lot. And then at this point, I might go in and search within results. And here I might look up frog, or I might look up golf, because I'm concerned with how a golf course reimagines land. And so I want to know, well, are there any cases that not only are in California and deal with endangered species, but that also help me with the golf course issue? And there are a couple cases, if you go through here, and we've narrowed it down now to 14 cases, very reasonable. This makes it very reasonable. Is this the be all end all that I'm going to search? It isn't. This is one search that I'm going to do. I'm going to look through these 14. I'm going to see if any of them can help me. And once I'm done with that, whether or not I find ones that help me, I'm going to go back and I'm going to remove golf as my filter, and maybe I put in frog and I see what comes up. As I'm reading these cases, as I'm looking through them, I might find other terms and other issues that all of a sudden I'm like, well, that is a little bit more of what I am interested in finding. And and one of those things that comes up is what you found earlier in the day, which is pesticides. Because one of the things that they can't do that a golf course, so if you were to go through some of these golf course cases, they hinge on the fact that the golf course uses certain pesticides that then get into the habitat, and that's not allowed. So if the golf course makes arrangements to not use certain pesticides, then they are more likely to get a variance to be able to do what they wanted to do, as long as they incorporate that habitat. But they have to agree that for a particular acreage, they will not use any kind of pesticide. So that's how that comes up when you found that example earlier. But what's different than how you found it in Google is it came up, but this is case law that's going to be more descriptive and more telling you why that is. And you'll see examples of golf courses that get variances from the EPA and from the federal wildlife and the state wildlife, because they agree to those certain conditions when they go about doing their thing. So that's one of the fun things that will come up through reading these different cases and finding out what it is. Maybe you can't have any actual holes within a certain distance of the habitat, but you can have the habitat as a beautiful visual for your golf course. And it doesn't really matter if they're discussing a frog or if they're discussing turtles, which there's a couple cases in here that specifically talk about turtles. It's because they're endangered species, and that's what you're analogizing. If you made this variance for a golf course with the turtles, then you can make this variance for us with the red-legged frog. And maybe a wildlife group comes back and says, no. The turtles are different. The turtles use this one area twice a year. It's when they're going to the sea. The red-legged frog is going to be here all the time. It's going to be here 365. That makes a difference. And the way you find those things is to look through case law. Now, another source that you use a lot is secondary sources. And secondary sources, you would do the same thing. There's over 10,000, and that's too much. That's too big. I have thrown out a huge net and pulled in all these fish. But I really only want purple fish that have blue fins. So being able to utilize these systems that allow us to limit it by date. I want to see the cases in the last 3 years. I want to see the California cases in the last 3 years. Utilizing these systems, and this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to all the different things that you can use these systems for. We spend hours teaching you how to use these systems for cases, for statutes, for secondary sources, regulations, practical law. There's all sorts of different things that this system allows you to do to try to pull up interesting facts that you can then utilize. But just doing a search and trying to look through 10,000 cases is never going to be a benefit to you. So we try to teach you how do you best use, and then we haven't even gotten into when you find a good case, you utilize these systems to help you find other cases that are similar, to find where in that a court opinion might be 80 pages long, and you do not want to read an 80-page court opinion. You just want to read the 5 pages that deal with endangered species. And these systems allow you to do that, where if you are looking at it just for free online, you won't get any of this extraneous information to help you. You only get the judge's words. So you only get, let's see, where does the judge start? Here. So everything above this scroll bar is all stuff that Westlaw has put into the court opinion to make your use of the court opinion easier and better for you in your research. I'm going to show you. Cut that one off. There are other systems out there that are much less expensive. And this particular one is called CEB. These are works that are published by the Continuing Education of the Bar of California. So it's California lawyers writing guides for California lawyers. And I just wanted to show you, I did land sale and endangered species just to see what would come up. And they have books that are specific on telling you how do you, in the land use approval process, an attorney must be aware of state and federal laws that may limit or prohibit subdivision and subsequent development of real property. So if in the beginning, before the person signed that land contract, bought that house for the golf course, if they had just gone here and read just a little bit to make sure that they knew what was going on and then looked into the red-legged frog, they might have been able to do something else with the contract or go back to the company and say, this might not be the best land for us to buy because of this red-legged frog. So there's all sorts of things. And as you work as an attorney, you don't just research one thing. You research many, many things for the same case. And you care because they're real people. In this case, it's a little bit less personal because it's a company. But in other cases, you have a crying child in the chair that is needing your help, or you have somebody that is going to lose their home, going to lose their job, that is going to lose their family, and you're going to care more, and the research is what's going to help you. And so it really is, I think it's like a big chess game. I think it's a lot of fun. I think learning how to use these systems while you're in school for 3 years, and you do different things, you do different externships, and you do different classes, that's where the fun comes in. Because I am sure only a fraction of you know exactly what kind of law you want to practice when you get out of law school. Most of you are going to get excited by a class that you're in, and you're going to get excited by some kind of research you do, or you're going to get excited by a clinic that Southwestern offers, or an externship that they offer. You might want to go into music law, but you end up getting an externship in a TV studio, and you start doing the music rights for the TV show. And you're like, well, this is actually better than being a music lawyer in a record studio. I actually really enjoy getting the licenses for new music in TV shows. And you'll get to experience all that and try it. And each thing that happens out there, whether you're a public defender or you're in immigration rights, it all leads to different types of research. There isn't just one, I research this way and that's all I do. And that's where we come in to help you. And we help you understand what you can do and understand how you can use the systems. And it is a lot of fun. So I made you a golf course attorney, but you may very well be some other kind of attorney. You may become a JAG attorney. And all of a sudden, your first day of work, they tell you you have these 2 soldiers that are being deployed and they need their wills done, because that has to be done before they're deployed. You might become a patent attorney because you're an engineer and you're going to go for the patent bar, and you need to know how to use the Copyright Office, the Patent Office, and the Trademark Office in conjunction with these databases. So each thing lends itself something different, but I hope you see that it's actually kind of fun, and that there are questions that come up that you don't even know are questions, and a little red-legged frog can just kill you. Any questions? Oh, I see some questions. I have since I'm not sharing, I can see some of the chat questions. So there's a question. How often do you see citations, for example, academic articles or sources outside of legal documents? What citation style is typically used? Okay, so this is the Blue Book.
What is
The
it?
Blue Book becomes a lifeblood for being in law school. It has all the citations. Depending on what you're writing, you will see academic law reviews and treatise citations. It depends on who your audience is. If you're writing a seminar paper to a professor, then you very well may cite to law review articles and treatises. But if you're citing to the court, you will do everything in your power not to cite to a secondary source, to always find a primary source, a law, a rule, a regulation, or a case, because that is what they care about. And very, very seldom will you ever cite to an academic source for a court issue. But we'll help you use that academic source to find those primary sources that you then can cite to. So, but the Blue Book is the citation system that we use. California has a California legal citation system, but in school we teach you the Blue Book because this is the universal one around the country. So this is what we teach you. I keep it by me. I have actually this one and the 1 year behind it, or the edition behind it, because I never know what the student is going to have a question about. And so I like to have both copies in case they ask a question. Let's see. I'll take one of the hands that are raised. David Zimmerman.
Yeah, hi. I just had a quick question regarding the databases. What happens, I think somebody actually asked this question in the chat, but anyways, what happens to laws that become outdated and that change? Like, do they change quickly on these databases, or does it take a long time for them to change and become updated?
So it depends. Usually if a new law comes in, that goes up on the databases very quickly, and a new case will go up in the databases. Here's what the problem is, and where you have to use the databases to find what you need. The system isn't going to pop up a little window that says this is what the law is. The system's going to pop up case law that uses your terms. It's going to pop up case law that uses your statute, and you have to make sure. And they have a system. It's called shepherdizing and key citing, and it is a difficult thing to explain in 5 minutes. But what it is it says, okay, you have this case from 1978. Is it still good law to be able to cite to it today? You have this statute. Is it still good law based on case law? Because for statutes, you have to have somebody actively put in a repeal. So either a new law has that repeal within it and it removes an old law, or it stays on the books. For instance, who's my Texas guy? Who's in Texas? Okay, so in Texas, on the books is still a law that says it is illegal to burn the American flag.
Absolutely.
But there is a Supreme Court case out there that says, no, you can burn the American flag, but there is no Texas congressperson that is going to put a bill into the hopper that says, we want to say it is okay to burn the American flag and repeal that law. So that law stays on the books, and it has a giant red flag or stop sign, depending on the system you're looking at, that says This law is still currently on the books in Texas, but this Supreme Court case has overruled it. But nobody has gone through the process of repealing it. And so it depends. So case law, it's slightly different. There's always cases that come up that you have to make sure, is this case that I want to rely on still good law? And the shepherdizing key citing system is how you figure that out. But in statutes, sometimes it's a little different where something actually does get repealed. So you might be researching somebody who committed a capital offense, committed a murder, but you don't want to hold them. If the murder that they're accused of took place in 1982, you don't want to hold them to the 2020 standards. So you might have to go back and find the 1982 law because that's the standards they'll have to be held to. So we'll help you with all that kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, and that's part of the second language that you're learning of legal research. Let's see.
We have a hand from Juanito again.
Yes, Juanito.
No, I'm sorry. I was just raising my hand to, it was a question about the case. I know that y'all were looking at endangered species, but one perspective I thought about looking at was looking at perhaps protected natural resources.
Yes. So,
as you mentioned, narrowing down the scope of your research and getting all these 10,000 populated, items in terms of when the law was applicable. And if you do that and looking at the natural resources, then you can know that no chemicals can permeate through the ground to get into fresh water where the frogs actually live. And that will more narrowly confine your search to more specifically to the protecting the red frog.
and what you're doing there is you're analogizing, right? You're analogizing that, let's say they wouldn't let somebody have the variation because of the groundwater. You could say, well, the frogs really don't use the water the same way that fish use the water, that the endangered fish uses the water in this case. So that's why you should see our case slightly differently. You should rule on our situation. And the other thing that happens is I keep a pad of paper next to me all the time, because as I'm reading and as I'm researching, I am always going to find other terms and issues that I either have to go back and research again, that I just didn't even think of that term. I didn't think of that issue, and I have to go back and do it again. So I did really just one search, but I might do 25 searches in the end of various words and key searches and looking at different areas of law. So it's not a bad thing. You know, we have this feeling, one of the things we try to get the first years to overcome is we are so used to that when we Google, the right answer is within the first 2 or 3 hits. In law, it isn't, because you're constantly learning more as you're researching. And that's why you do multiple searches, because you're going to keep finding different things, but you'll feel good when you see some of the same cases over and over again, some of the same statutes over and over again. It's not that you're doing it wrong. It's that, yes, it's called researching in circles. You are doing it right because you're finding the same things and a couple new things every time. And then you know, oh, these are the good cases and these are the most important statutes. So that's actually a good thing. So we try to teach you that it's not Google, that you really do have to research multiple times with variations of terms, variations of keywords, and that's a good thing.
I had a quick
Professor
question,
Hall?
if I could, Margaret.
Ken, let's go in order. So I'm going to ask a question from the chat from SL Davis Maxey, and then we'll move to Stefan, then Tanayera, and then was that Ken who had the question?
Please, thank you.
Yeah, so we'll go Stefan, Tanayera, and Ken after this one. So the question in the chat, which I think is a really good one, says, I'm very interested in the research aspect of law school and lawyering. The process of utilizing these resources academically is invaluable, but I am curious about how current students are empowered and supporting in completing or presenting research projects associated with a specific area of interest. For example, conferences they might participate in, or independent work done on the campus. And I'm also going to add things like being a research assistant for a professor or doing externship work.
Yep, I I think the most exciting thing that Southwestern does a huge amount of work in is the externship program. And that is mostly done in the summer. And the bulk of our questions that we help you with are assignment questions that way. But seminars are very exciting here too. I just did a class for the critical race theory, where we talk about how you might have to research words that you would never speak in today's world, but in 1832, that was the term that was used, or how statistics work. So the school is actually very supportive of that. When you have an idea of what you can usually find a class that works with it, or there are classes like my advanced legal research class that allows for you to pick any subject you want to do, because that might be what you go into, and to research it fully. I had a student whose husband was going to school. She was going to Southwestern. Her husband was going to school in Las Vegas. And she was in my class, and she came up to me and she goes, I would really like, my husband and I want to open some brothels. We want to open up classy couple-based brothels instead of what is currently offered outside of Las Vegas, which is, you know, they're not very pretty, I guess, and they're not. So she was like, we want to research the advertising and what you can do. And she thought I'd say no. And I said, no, go ahead, research it. Let's figure out what are the advertising laws for, there's Paradise, Nevada, which is the Strip, and then there's Las Vegas, and then there's Henderson. Figure out what the laws are, the municipal codes, what you have to do. Figure out what your requirements are for having employees in a brothel. And she was ecstatic because her and her husband were actually thinking of doing this, and that's what she wanted to research. That's where they were going to use their legal knowledge, was starting this kind of business. And go ahead, do it. Let's see what happens. Does that answer that question somewhat?
I hope so. It was in the chat, so she may not have her microphone on. But thank you, Professor Hall. And now we'll move to Stefan.
Yes, thank you. Professor Hall, I just had a question. When you're writing a brief and you're going to use citations, would you limit it to a single citation, or would you use multiple cases, multiple jurisdictions, just to emphasize, I guess, the power of your argument in a brief?
So jurisdictional wise, normally not, because you want to stick in the jurisdiction that you're presenting to, unless you have nothing in that jurisdiction. But yes, to multiple citations. So many times you might use a seminal case on a topic, and that seminal case might be from 1994. Then you want to show how that case is still being used today. So you cite to, in addition, a 2019 case to show, here's the seminal case, and it's still being used today as precedent, so therefore you should also use it as precedent. And that is not uncommon. There also might be times where you have your case that is factually similar to the case that you have, but then you use other cases to bolster the argument that, yes, it's good in the toothpaste case, but it's also was used in the shaving cream case, and it was also used in the shampoo case, because they're all similar. And so you use it that way. So many times you cite to multiple cases for whatever reason. You want to show, say the seminal case happened in Northern California, and you want to show that an LA court also utilized a case that was just similar to that. So the seminal one, where they use all the same language over and over again, is from Northern California, but you can have a case from the last 5 years in LA using the same language. So yes, you would, it's how you best want to make your argument.
Understood. And you would also potentially cross over from state to federal?
It would depend on what the issue was. And it would depend on if the federal case, in my opinion, it always depends on how much you have to work with, how many cases you have to help make your point. The less case law you have to make your point, the further out you may reach. So a federal case that applies state California law might be applicable to you, and different things like that. But you have to they go through in your first year a real emphasis in understanding where your jurisdiction is and what is mandatory authority and what is persuasive authority. And that makes a difference.
I
Okay.
want to recognize that we are at the end of our scheduled event time, so please feel free to leave if you need to. We are still going to take Tanayera and Ken's questions, but I just wanted to let people know, don't feel shy about leaving, and thank you for joining us tonight. So Tanayera, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question.
May I interject? Hello?
I'm gonna let Tanayera have her turn to ask a question. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. My name is Tanera Green. No problem. It's hard to pronounce sometimes. My question had to do with when you referred to using LexisNexis or Westlaw in conjunction with, let's say, the patent office or the trademark office and such. Could you explain what the differences are? I have some experience with the USPTO. I think I'm saying that acronym right. Website. Always kind of switch them around. But I was just wondering what the differences are, because I'm very interested in like the fashion aspect, patent law, and like trademark.
Yep. So normally for most of the government websites, you have to learn how to use them. They all have their own little quirks and specialities. So that's one thing, but they're free. So why spend money? Because Westlaw and Lexis are going to grab all the free information and try to put them on their database and have you pay for them. So a lot of people use a less expensive. So if you are going to always deal with the patent office, you're going to learn how to use their system so that you only jump on Westlaw and Lexis when you need something that they don't really have. So for instance, they won't have the breadth of case law. So you'll be able to get the patent designs and the information and that kind of factual information, but they won't have a listing of, and these are the cases that went along with this patent, or these are the cases that went along with that issue. Westlaw and Lexis will have more of that information. So that way, why pay Westlaw and Lexis if you know how to use those systems for free? Now, if you are not a regular user of the patent office and you have to spend all this time learning their idiosyncrasies, then it does make more of a financial difference to just say, I'm just going to use Westlaw. And I'm going to have Westlaw pull up the patent for me, pull up the case law and do it, because this is not my normal realm of what I work on. So that's sort of the difference. But if there's a free government site, if you are always working with the Fish and Wildlife and learning the Fish and Wildlife websites and how they give you information for free is much more beneficial to you. So you don't spend all your money on a system like Westlaw and Lexis.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Great. And then Ken?
Thanks. I thought I'd kind of piggyback off the last question. It changes the focus a little bit of what I was originally going to ask. But I was wondering, other than Google, we'll have to have subscriptions to Westlaw and Lexis, and you talked about how prohibitively expensive those are. If someone were to go into business for themselves, are there other search engines? Like I use DuckDuckGo, which is a new one that's not, it shows blockers and it shows pop-ups, and it's different than, it has goofy sounding name, but it's different than Google. And I was wondering if there's other search engines that are more affordable, because one of the people that I spoke to when I wanted to go to law school was a governor for the California law schools, or for California lawyers. And he was telling me how much flack he got from just lawyers in general about the small fee every year, which is, I think, like a couple $100 to be a lawyer in California to the bar. So I was wondering, if someone wants to go to work for themselves, how realistic is that? Or do you have to be in the game, with the technology to be competitive?
So we have a lot of people at Southwestern that go into solo practice or small firm, and it is different. Westlaw and Lexis do have a different pricing structure if you are a solo firm or a small firm. So they do try to help that. But places like Southwestern, so for instance, my library, we purchased 2 computer terminals that have Westlaw on them. So if you physically come in as an alum, which we have quite a few alums that will physically come in, they have access to almost everything we have if they sit on certain computers. And then they can access things like CEB Pro and on Hein Online and other databases. So we have some lawyers that come in specifically to utilize those systems when they need it, because they don't need it on such a regular basis that they have to buy it themselves. So they come in, you know, maybe once a week, or if a certain project comes up and they want to see what Westlaw has, they come in and they sit for a couple hours, get their work done and go. Systems like that CEB that I showed you, that is a much more economical source for a small practitioner. And there are many solo practitioners that would buy CEB and use it for the bulk of their work, and then just use Westlaw and Lexis sparingly and buy the lowest package that you can. Or maybe not even, because you can get systems like Fastcase and CaseMaker and some other ones with your bar dues. So there are many ways to go about making it economical. However, there is no free system. There may be in 10 years, and there's people that want to do it, but there is no good at this time free system that does what I talked about before, which is I have a 1978 case and I need to shepherdize it or key cite it or B-cite it. That way of saying, I have this case and I need to know everything that has happened since that case was decided in 1978. They're called citator systems. And every database has something that tries to help you with that, but there's no free good one out on the web yet. There was a company that tried to do it called Case Text. Before they even got off the ground and I was even remotely impressed with the quality, they ended up charging because they just couldn't do it for free. So having the ability to go into a library is hugely important if you're going to be a solo practitioner or a small firm. But the other thing is that probably none of you are going to be generalists in a small town where you're going to handle a drunk driving case one day and a divorce another day and a will the next day. And you're going to really become focused on an area, and you're going to get to know that area of law really well. And you might say, I'm a bankruptcy attorney. I don't want to buy Lexis just because I love Collier on bankruptcy. So I'm just going to buy myself Collier on bankruptcy. And I'm going to have that sitting on my bookcase so that I can grab it when I need it. So there's all sorts of ways to become more economical, especially for solo. But one of the best ways is having a library that's open to you for the rest of your lives. And that's what we do with alums. We make sure that when we cancel things, that there is an ability for them to use it online, that there's an ability, even right now, our alums have access to certain databases that they won't get once we are back and physically open. But now they get it because of the COVID situation. So we make sure that our alums can have that ability.
So how do you, so you obviously have a great perspective of the breadth and depth of all the different systems and how law works. From someone who's looking at going to law school, you know, I'm just kind of trying to be a quick sponge here with what you're saying. And I wrote down a bunch of notes and hopefully I can refer to them, and I'm sure they'll be very valuable down the line. Thank you. But just in looking at the 5 classes that are the main classes, like the crim law, constitutional law, torts, and the 5 classes, and then a legal research class that I'd probably take the first year as well as a 1L. When do you start to kind of like understand how to connect the dots and make connections between all these things? Is that during the first year, or?
Yep, the first year, you're sponges and you learn so much. So your first year writing and research assignment, there's a couple different ones. The first one, it's almost spoon-fed to you. You get a packet that has the right cases, it has the good statutes, because they want you to start to be able to recognize the holdings and the reasoning and all those areas. The next one has a little more independent research and you have a little more independent writing. And then by your second semester, so you agonize that first semester because it's the first time you've done it and it's the hardest time. But if I were to give the second year students the problem for the first year students, they would look at me and say, why do they get it so easy? Why do they have such an easy one when I had such a hard one? And it's not that it's easier, it's just that's how much better you've grown at being able to research quickly, being able to understand the cases better. So it really is your first year. You spend more time than you think it's worth, but it's only because it's the first time you're doing everything. It's like taking a drive somewhere. The first time you're driving somewhere and you're looking at the directions, it feels like it takes forever. But the second time you make that same drive, you're like, oh, well, this wasn't long at all, because now you know where to turn, you know where to turn. So it's hard that, but yes, your 2, 3, and 4 years in law school is really, everything is preparing you to be the best you can be. You go out to the summer work or clinics and you get real life problems and they make you see things differently, so that when you have real clients out and you're charging them, you're as good as you can be. And even your first 5 years as an attorney, you're still that sponge and you're still learning a lot. And they know that. That's why a new associate at a large firm has a lower billable rate than a seasoned attorney, right? Because a seasoned attorney should be able to charge more because they should be quicker at it. They should be faster at it.
So I had a kind of question. My goal would be to work for myself, but there's a lot of variables in the world, especially with COVID. No one really knows, how feasible it is to go into large law firms in the future. And, that's a dynamic that I know you can't, answer or have a crystal ball on. But when people, when they try to work for themselves, they, what's the, do you know what the skew of the percent that work for themselves out of Southwestern or work for small firms? It must be the majority, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, we don't necessarily have that specific information. Anyone can see the published employment statistics
Sure.
on our website under ABA disclosures, or if you search for 509 report, or you just scroll to the very bottom, there's a disclosure link.
I went to school with Dave Martinez. He's like a partner at one of the law firms in LA, great. And he's a Southwestern alum.
That's great. Yeah, we do just sort of anecdotally, we do have a lot of alumni who do put out their own shingle, as they say, who work solo or in small firms that they build with other alumni that they know or are friends with or professional colleagues with. So it's a very common career path. The nice thing about LA, though, is there's so many different employment opportunities that people generally have the pick of the area that they want to enter into. So I just want to start wrapping up the event here. So thank you all so much for coming and for your questions, Ken and everyone else that participated. So if you do want to reach out to Professor Hall, you can contact the admissions office and we can put you in contact with her. And again, my name is Nancy. So if you do have questions for me directly, you can also contact the admissions office. I will put that information in the chat so you have our email address and our phone number. So thank you so much again for joining us, and I hope you all have a great rest of your night.